Okay, we are going to assemble the quilt block. So on your instructions, you want to turn to page 14, and we're going to start there at number 1. You are going to collect your 4.5-inch squares. So what you need from the 4.5-inch squares, you need a total of your you need 4 pieces that are your M2, 2 pieces that are your background, and 2 pieces that are L3. So you're going to collect those together. You're going to take your pieces, the 4, the M2, and we're going to draw a diagonal line on the M2. Just one diagonal line. And make sure you're using a marking pen that you can see. If you use an air erase, you want to make sure you do this sooner than later. But you got to mark a piece that your ink is going to show up. So I have marked my line, and you want to do this on all 4 of your M2 pieces, so you can see that I have all 4 of those. We're going to put 2 of those on the background and 2 of those on your L3. This is important that we don't get too many, because I did do this and I had to get other fabric. I accidentally stitched the wrong ones to that, so I put the separate piles. I put 2 of the L3 with 2 of the M2, and then 2 of the background with 2 of the M2, so that I could keep them straight. Once we get them together, we're going to place right sides together, like we've done before when we do half square triangles. You're going to come in, and we are going to sew a 1/4 inch to each side on each side of this piece. What I've done before is I'll take my Wonder clips and clip my corners, and then after I clip my corners, then I'm going to sew that on both sides. After we clip those, we are going to get a piece that looks like this, and we are going to cut down on the line that we drew, and this is in between the 2 stitch lines. We're going to get 2 pieces. Now this one had a background piece on it, the other one will have the M2 and the L3. If this is much easier for people, this is a good point to come in and press the seam to the dark side. So I want to come in and I want to press the seam to the dark side, away from the background. So on all of these pieces, press them towards M2. So you're going to press them all towards M2. I did press mine open, but I made that harder on myself. So press them to M2. You will get pieces that look like this. So here's a piece with M2 with the white background, M2 with L3, background M2, L3. What you want to do is, I'm going to line these up so you can see that on one piece I have the M2 down and the M2 up, and then there's the opposite pieces will be the background and then the L3. We are going to take these and fold these over. If you fold all these pieces to the M2, you can butt up your seams. I folded them open, so I had to go in there and pin strategically. I had to come in, line up my line, pin strategically through this so that they would match up. So on the back side, once you get those, you're going to draw a line down the center of each one of these pieces. So if you have that, you may want to take your piece off of the other one and come in and draw a line. So you can see on this one where I folded it to M2, and then on this one I folded it also to M2. So what that allows you to do is, remember when I had it folded like this? I'm going to take this and flip this over, line up my corners, but when I get here, I can just butt those fabrics together so that the seams hit and they go together much nicely. So this one, press the seams to M2. Then, where my line is drawn, I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch on each side. Again, I'm going to take my Wonder clips, pin them in the corner, and then sew a 1/4 inch on each side. After we sew a 1/4 inch on each side, we get this here. We're going to cut the line down our drawn line that we drew between the 2 sewn lines. So now I have 2 pieces that look like this that are the background. So the pieces will end up looking like this. And this one, I went ahead and pressed them open because I felt that at this point it worked better if we pressed these seams open. I got them to lay a little nicer. Now what we have to do is we have to square these up to make sure that they match to 3.5 by 3.5. So I am going to take a square ruler, and you can see on the square ruler where I got the diagonal line. I am going to line it up. Now if we take half of 3.5 is 1 3/4. So if I look at my ruler, I'm going to come in on the diagonal line, and I'm going to come to the point where it says 1 3/4, which is right here. So you can count up 2/8 inch. So if I come over 1 3/4 is here, 1 3/4 is here. That should be your center point. I'm going to take my 45-degree line. I'm going to line it up on the sewn line, and we're going to get this centered. And we want to look here and make sure that this 3.5 is close to this line, and this 3.5 is close to this sewn line. So we got to try to get it centered. If your block's a little bit wonky, we can kind of adjust the fabric a little bit to get it to match that. Now, to prevent stretching, you can always hit this with best press before you start sewing the half square triangles. So that will help you in this process, is if we hit the best press before you start sewing them together. So I got my 3.5, 3.5. I'm lined up at my corners. So I'll show you again when I'm squaring this up to 3.5. 45-degree line, 1 3/4 should be at the center. I'm having my line follow my seam here. I am looking here to make sure that this seam line is right at about 3.5. This seam line's right at about 3.5. And if we have to adjust the ruler slightly, we will. We want to try to get it as centered as possible. I'm going to turn this, and here is another one of my 3.5 inch squares. Now, next, we are going to take the L2, which is 4 inch squares, and the background piece. And we are going to take, and you could draw it on the background, or you could draw it on the L2 on the back side. We're going to draw a diagonal line. On this one, we're just making half square triangles. And I'm going to place this right sides together, of course. I'm going to come in, use my Wonder Clips, pin the corners so that this doesn't move. And we're going to sew a 1/4 inch on each side of this line. And once we've done that, we're going to get a piece that looks like this. So I'm going to cut on the line that I drew between the two sewn lines. Now, this one here, you can press it to the L2 side, or you could press these open. At this one, I did press my seams open. So we have all these pieces here, the half square triangles. We need to trim these up to 3.5 inches. So here, on this one, since it's a half square triangle, I'm just having my 45-degree line following exactly on my seam line. And then I'm making sure that the entire block is within the 3.5 measurement. So I want to make sure that it's at the 3.5 here, up here, and around the edges. So I want to make sure 3.5 is within, and I have a little fabric hanging over each part. So I'm squaring this up. My 45-degree line's on my seam line, and my edges are at 3.5. Again, I will show you that. Here's my half square triangle. The 45-degree line is on my seam line. I'm looking at this. I want to make sure that I have fabric hanging just outside all my 3.5 points, and we're going to trim it up. Now we're going to do something that we have not done before. After we get those trimmed up, we're going to take that 2 inch by 2 inch square of the D1 fabric. I'm going to draw a diagonal line. I'm trying to make it dark enough so everybody can see it on the camera. Yeah, you can kind of see that. So I drew my diagonal line. I'm going to take the piece that we just squared up. I'm going to place this on the L2 side, not the background side. And you see where I placed it in the corner. I'm making sure that it's on the edge here, and up at the corner. I'm making sure that this is lined up with the bottom fabric. I'm going to come in, Wonder Clip. We are going to sew directly on the line or a scant just to the right. So if you're a sewing machine and you're starting here at this point, right here, you want your needle just barely. So if you have a thick line, don't go off the line necessarily. but just to the right of it, and that would be your scant. And then you would sew that down. After you've sewn it down, you have this piece here. So what we'll do is, here's my sewn line. I'm going to put my ruler on it and cut a 1/4 inch away from the edge. At this point, we can either come in and press the seam open, like I've done here, or we can press it to the D1 fabric, or you can press it up, whichever you prefer on that one. I again actually press mine open. So your end piece will look like this. So now let's assemble the quilt block. Alright, we are assembling the quilt block. So remember on my previous ones that on some of my demo, my yellow is my background. So I'm going to have the yellow right now pointing out. And you can follow this on your sheet of paper here on page 14. So I'm going to have this. I'm going to have my yellow out, my D1 facing in, yellow out, my center piece, yellow facing out from the center of the block. So you can see here how I'm assembling the block. That's what the block will look like. So if I kind of separate this a little bit, you can kind of see the edge in between it. So now that we have our block laid out, we're going to make 2 of these. And so we're going to take this piece and we're going to fold it over, sew it to that piece. We're going to take this piece, sew it, and we're sewing down this edge here. And we're going to sew all these pieces together. After we have sewn them together, we still have pieces that look like this. So these are the ones that we've just sewn, so you can see that I have no space in between them. We are going to take this piece, sew it to this piece to this piece, so we're sewing along this edge, this piece to this piece, and we're sewing along down this edge here. After we sew them, and again, the background here on this one is this like periwinkle grunge. So our rows will be stitched together. And then we're going to stitch our rows together. So I stitched the bottom row to the top, and now I'm going to stitch the top row to the bottom. So I got my corner here. I'm going to take this, and you can see here where I want to line up my diagonal line there. Use a straight pin. I like straight pins on this part of the project. So I'm going to straight pin this so it doesn't move. The next spot that we need to line up is, you can see where this seam is here. So if you can kind of see here, see where this comes up at a diagonal. Here, this fabric is at an angle, and then this fabric is at an angle. We want the center seam lined up, and we want to fold this up until the 2 points of the diagonal meet. So we want them to meet each other so that our points line up and our center seam is lined up. I'm going to pin there. And we're going to come in and we're going to come to the next one. And again, here's my diagonal line here coming up. And then I have my diagonal line here coming up. I want these 2 points to meet. So I want the center seam to meet, and I want those 2 points to meet. Now, for some people, they felt it easier if they took the straight pin and put it in the point here, and then put it in this point here. So some people like doing this method to get their points completely lined up. I have found that isn't great for me, but it might be great for other people, and then I could pin it this way. That way our points are together. So whichever method is better for you. Then we're going to come to the very end piece, and again we want to line up our diagonal lines here because we want them to match. And that, so if this is off just a little bit, that is not as important as matching that up so the diagonal line goes off. And then we're going to pin there, and then we're going to sew across there, and that's how you sew your rows together. And then our finished block, voila, looks like this. Don't you like to hear finished block? I'm going to move the camera. So here's our finished block. We are going to take our short 2-inch strips. We're going to sew them on the side, and you can see this back on page 13. And we're going to sew these to the side, and then we're going to sew the white strip to the top. And the instructions do tell you to press it to the strips, or you can press them open. So that is month 4. I really like these triangles here. I can't wait to get to the next month. So if you have any questions, don't forget we have the question and answer coming up, and I will be happy to answer any questions on that date. All right, everybody have a wonderful day, and I will see you at question and answer or next month. All right, bye.